Hi everyone and welcome back to Emmy Lou Books. In today's video I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be discussing some books that I've read that have made me think, had an impact on me, or perhaps made me view things in a different way. So before I start talking about these books, I want to introduce you to someone very special. So this is my new dwarf rabbit. His name is Thanos, and as you can see he is absolutely terrifying. So as I said, I'm going to be talking about books that made me think, had an impact on me. I've got 10 books here, so I'm going to go through each of them one by one, explain the synopsis briefly, and then tell you my thoughts on each book. So the first book that I wanted to talk about is a bit of a controversial one, and that is Lolita, and I can never quite pronounce the author's name properly, but I'm going to give it a go. Vladimir Nabokov, and I'm really sorry if that's wrong, but that's the best that it's going to get. So the story of Lolita follows a literary professor called Humbert, and he meets a 12-year-old girl called Dolores. So obviously, as you all know, they begin a sexual relationship. This book always really gets to me for a number of reasons. I feel really conflicted about the story as a whole and how I really feel about it. I first read this book in university perhaps 3 years ago, and I've thought about the book a lot since then. And I think the main issue that I have with this book that a lot of people have, it's not really an issue, but it's something that's made me think and question things, is the fact that I'm not quite sure who the victim of this story is. So before you all start jumping up and saying, what are you saying? I know that that is a really controversial thing to say, but I think the reason that I say it is because the character of Dolores is incredibly manipulative. Obviously, he is an adult and he should know not to act on his impulses, but at the same time, Dolores, who he then later calls Lolita as a nickname, is incredibly manipulative. And even when he goes back to visit her when she's an adult, I still don't like her character at all. I don't like her when she's a child, and I don't like her when she's an adult. And this is something that I found really conflicting, and I know that a lot of other people have with this story. Usually it's very obvious to be able to identify who the victim is, but when it comes to Lolita, I just struggle. So if you want to experience the story of Lolita and you don't want to read the book, because I'm not going to lie, it is a long and complex read. It's not an easy read. It's one of those things that you really sort of need to be able to take in and have time to absorb. So if you don't want to do that, then I would recommend watching the movie. There are 2 movies that were made based on the story of Lolita. I recommend watching the second one with Jeremy Irons, which is really good, and hopefully you can make up your own mind about the story. This is a story that has had me conflicted for years and years because I just don't know how I feel about it. So the next book that really got me thinking is Room by Emma Donoghue. This is an absolutely fantastic book. I love it so much. I read it, I think, about 2 years ago. And it was kind of the first sort of adult book that I read, because usually now I read primarily YA fantasy, but this is definitely not YA or fantasy. So Room tells the story of 2 main characters that we follow. One is called Ma and the other is called Jack. And Jack is 5 years old, and basically their life is just in a room. So the main character, who we know as Ma, was actually kidnapped. She was abducted when she was about 17 or 18, I think. And the captor basically keeps her in this room. What we can conclude is that he rapes her, and the result of that is Jack. So Jack and Ma are living in this room, and it's a really atmospheric yet claustrophobic story. Eventually they do manage to escape from the room, and it's really interesting because you see how both of them struggle to integrate back into society. Obviously, they've been through so much, especially the woman, and I can't remember her name. So I can't remember her name, but this book was made into a movie, and I think in the movie we do learn her name. In this book, she's basically just known as Ma. So yeah, anyway, they do escape, and like I said, it's really fascinating to see how they integrate back into society and how they struggle. And this book really got me thinking about desperation and how being in a desperate and unusual situation can drive you to do things that you usually wouldn't be brave enough to do. All in all, Room is a really, really fantastic read, so if you haven't read it, then I highly recommend it, or you can watch the movie, which is not as good, but is still quite good. So the next book on my list of books that got me thinking, inspired me, made me think, is The Art of Happiness. So in this, basically a psychologist called Howard C. Cutler follows the Dalai Lama around, and we all know who the Dalai Lama is, obviously. So he follows him around and he talks to him about different issues and asks him different questions, and basically just to get an idea of the Dalai Lama's philosophy and his beliefs. So I actually stole this book from my stepdad. So if you're watching and you wondered where this book disappeared to, I have it, and I'm really sorry, but I took it. I really, really love this book because I feel like, and this is gonna sound really, really corny, but I feel like when I came across this book, it kind of found me rather than me finding it. And yeah, I know that does sound really, really corny, but this book inspired me so much. The Dalai Lama talks about things like short-term happiness and long-term happiness. Short-term happiness, basically, according to the Dalai Lama, is things like a situation where you might win the lottery, for example. So you might be really, really happy and over the moon and on cloud nine, but according to the Dalai Lama, that happiness is not going to last, and eventually you're going to go back to your original state. Long-term happiness is more to do with being happy with who you are on the inside and surrounding yourself by people who you love, and just basically being content with who you are and your life. This book really just inspired me at the time, as I say. It was something that I think did definitely find me at a time when I was feeling very, very confused and conflicted about my own life. And it's kind of the biggest thing that I took away from this book is just to be kind to yourself and don't be too hard on yourself. So this book is very, very special to me, and if you haven't read it, I highly recommend you do. It's called The Art of Happiness, and it really is amazing. So the next book that I want to talk about is a book that I've discussed a lot on this channel already, and it is The Way I Used to Be by Amber Smith. I know I've been harping on and on about this book for a really, really long time, but the reason being is that I just really, really feel like this was such a beautifully delivered and executed book. The Way I Used to Be tells the story of a young girl who is a junior in high school, and she is raped by her brother's best friend. The story really sort of tells her story from being a junior in high school all the way up to being a senior. And the thing about this book that really, really stuck with me and made me think was just that how trauma and how traumatic experiences can really change a person. So Eden, who is the main character of this book, after the attack, she completely changes. Her personality changes, the way that she dresses changes, her attitude towards life changes. But the great thing about this book is that it's not an instantaneous change. The book really takes its time to kind of show the progression from the person that she was to the person that she becomes at the end of the book. The Way I Used to Be really, really is so amazing, and if you haven't read it and you're looking for a more kind of gritty book that deals with some serious issues but is executed in a beautiful way, then I would definitely recommend The Way I Used to Be by Amber Smith. So following on from that, a book that is quite similar, I guess, in a lot of ways to The Way I Used to Be is Now Is Everything by Amy Giles. This book tells the story of Hadley, who is in high school, and she's got a lot of stuff going on back home. So basically back home, her father is really, really abusive towards her. He beats her, he loses her temper, he burns her, and some really, really other disgusting, quite uncomfortable things to read and to experience. Hadley is mostly concerned for her younger sister because up until now, the father's main focus has been taking his anger out on Hadley, and he's sort of left the younger sister alone. And Hadley's biggest fear is that he's going to lose interest in her, I guess, and start abusing the younger sister. So I don't want to give too much away, but it does end. The ending is quite intense. The message that I got from this is how far somebody is willing to go when they're scared, and what they're willing to do to protect themselves and protect their loved ones, and how fear can really drive you to do things that you wouldn't normally do. Now Is Everything was a really, really intense, but again, beautifully written book. So if it sounds like something you might enjoy, I would highly recommend reading it. So the next book is a little bit more upbeat, and that is Scythe by Neil Schutzman. As you all know, Neil Schutzman is my new favourite author. I think he's absolutely incredible, and Scythe was my favourite book from 2018. So Scythe tells the story of a dystopian world in which basically no one can die. In order to keep the population under control, the government, I guess, anoint these people called Scythes who go around and glean people, which basically means kill them. The people that they glean are chosen at random, and this is a way of keeping the population under control in a fair and just way. This book really got me thinking about the future and what the future holds for mankind. In a way, I think that this is kind of cool, the idea that we can't get sick and that we don't have any problems with our health, even like mental health problems. Nobody has that in Scythe because everything's sort of been dealt with. And the fact that people are gleaned obviously is not very nice, but it's a way of keeping the population under control, and I find that really, really interesting about this book. At the same time, it terrifies me because you are just chosen at random. So it basically means somebody could just come to your door, a scythe could just come to your door and say, you've been selected at random for gleaning today. And that's what happens in this book. And just the thought of that and the idea of that, the fact that you don't even have time to kind of get used to it or adjust to it, it's going to happen then and there. And even though in the book some of the nicer sides do give the people that have been selected a chance to say their goodbyes and things like that, it is still really, really sudden, and that kind of terrifies me. And this book got me thinking about the future a lot and what the future holds for mankind. I was thinking about this book for so long after I read it, and it still amazes me. I think this is such an original and unique book. I absolutely love it. So if for some crazy reason you haven't read Scythe, I would highly recommend reading it. The second book in the series is Thunderhead, and there is going to be a third book coming out as well. So the next book that I want to discuss that really had an impact on me and got me thinking is Sadie by Courtney Summers. This has been a book that I've discussed before. I did a whole discussion video on this, and I actually also did a discussion video for The Way I Used to Be, so I'll leave both of those links down below. Sadie tells the story of a 19-year-old girl, Sadie, who discovers that her younger sister has been brutally murdered. Knowing this, Sadie runs away from home as she is determined to find the person who was responsible for her younger sister's murder and bring them to justice. So like with The Way I Used to Be and Now Is Everything, this really got me thinking about desperation and how something traumatic, a traumatic event, can really change somebody. In this book, Sadie is just completely on autopilot. When she hears that her sister's being murdered, it's like an automatic thing. She's going to find the person that is responsible and she's going to bring them to justice. Basically, she's going to kill them. I find this kind of way of thinking really, really incredible because it never even crosses Sadie's mind about getting into trouble with the police or endangering herself necessarily. The only thing that she thinks about is just getting justice for her younger sister. I guess this story kind of got me thinking a lot. I mean, it is a beautifully written story anyway, but I guess it kind of got me thinking because I don't have any younger siblings, and I'm just trying to imagine The closest thing that I can imagine is if something happened to somebody that I love and how I would react. And it's one of those things that you never really know unless it happens to you. I found Sadie a really, really fascinating and detailed account of somebody who is just determined to just find somebody and just to destroy them in order to sort of get revenge and justice for her sister's murder. As I said, this is a really, really beautifully written book. I listened to this book on audio. It was absolutely amazing, and it really was a book that got me thinking, and I think that this is a story that's going to stay with me for a really, really long time. So next up we have Behaviour You Give by Angie Thomas. Behaviour You Give was really the book of 2017. I know that it's won a bunch of awards, and it's very well deserved because The Hate You Give is absolutely amazing. It tells the story of a young girl called Star, and she is in the car with one of her best friends, Khalil, and he is basically shot and murdered by a cop. I'm ashamed to say that I haven't really read many books like this, but this book definitely got me thinking about police brutality, especially in the United States, and just what it must be like to have that kind of fear. It really, really had an impact on me and made me think. The writing is absolutely beautiful. The story is really infectious. The movie that came out, I watched, and I was actually super happy with, because a lot of the times when you have an adaptation from book to movie, they cannot be as good and as strong, but the movie is also really, really fantastic. So this was definitely a book that got me thinking and had an impact on me. I highly recommend you read The Hate You Give before you watch the movie. It really is a fantastic book, and it definitely got me thinking, as I said, and had an impact on me. It was just all round an amazing read. So the next book that got me thinking and had an impact on me was We Are the Ants by Sean David Hutchinson. This was such an interesting read, and when I think about my time reading this book, it's always filled with fond memories because it is such a different and unique story. We Are the Ants follows our main character Henry, and he is in high school, and Henry is basically, he's just completely given up on life. His long-term boyfriend committed suicide, and this is obviously part of the reason why Henry has given up on life. He just feels completely helpless. He's struggling to deal with the death of his boyfriend, and he just basically doesn't want to be here anymore. So when Henry was 13, he started to be abducted by aliens, and this is where the story takes a little bit of an interesting twist. Basically, the aliens that have been abducting Henry communicate to him that he has 144 days to either destroy the Earth or to save it. Obviously, Henry at that time is like, well, obviously destroy it, because he's feeling like absolute crap and he doesn't want to be here anyway, until he meets a boy called Diego. So Diego really opens up a whole new world for Henry, because Henry starts to fall in love with Diego and things start to happen at home, and Henry's character and way of looking at the world definitely does brighten and change towards the middle to the end of the book. This book really got me thinking about death and how death of a loved one, especially when it's something that happened that was particularly traumatic and unpleasant, how that can affect a person. Henry's character is really, really unique and interesting, and it was a really, really fun time just reading the book and seeing how his personality changes from the beginning of the story to the end of the story. So I'm not going to give away the ending if you haven't read it, but this was definitely a really impactful story, and it made me think a lot, as I said, about death and how people deal with death and the mourning period, and the fact that people mourn at different rates and in different ways. If you haven't read We Are the Ants, I would highly recommend it. It was really unusual and fascinating and quite sad, but it was a really, really impactful book that made me think a lot. So if it sounds like something you'd enjoy, I would highly recommend it. So the last book on the list of books that made me think and had an impact on me or changed the way that I view certain things is Moxie. I remember when I first read Moxie, I absolutely loved it so much. It makes me so happy thinking about this book. We follow Viv, who is the main character. She's in high school and she herself is a feminist, and she kind of takes a step back and looks around her school and realizes that there's a lot of sexism and gender stereotyping going on in her school. She teams up with some other girls who feel exactly the same way as she does, and together they form the Moxie Girls. And this was just really, it warmed my heart so much. I studied gender as part of my course at university, and I wish that I had something like this to read when I was like 14, 15, 16. I think it's absolutely fantastic that books like this exist for young girls to read and to educate themselves and to maybe think, maybe they've had some sort of comment thrown at them and they've just sort of sat back and taken it. And this sort of book can help them understand, hang on a minute, no, I'm not going to take that. That's just unacceptable. There are a lot of other books like Moxie. The Nowhere Girls was very similar, but for me, Moxie just has that extra edge. I loved it so much, and it makes me so happy thinking about this. And again, it got me thinking again about gender stereotyping and sexism and how it's still so much of an issue, even in 2019. But if you haven't read Moxie, I highly recommend it. It was such a fun read and educational at the same time. So that concludes today's video about the 10 books that I read that have had an impact on me. I hope that you found it interesting. I would love to hear what books have had an impact on you and made you think about things and maybe made you see things in a different light. So thanks for watching, and I will see you very soon for another video.